Siddharta, the show This Is Us has proven to be a huge success, kind of a surprising success. Why do you think it took off so quickly and so well with audiences?
Well, I think the show, at its core, it's about family, and it's something that that everybody can relate to, just by virtue of it being a show about family. And then on top of it, it's incredibly honest and and discusses issues that that affect people, that affect every person. They affect no matter who you are, or what ethnicity you are, or what you believe in or don't believe in. I think people can relate to the show. I think the other incredible strength of the show is that it's incredibly diverse, in front of and behind the camera. And I think that that diversity is something the show celebrates and does it in a very subtle way. And I think just, at its core, the show is about the humanity of these characters, and people have been able to relate to these characters.
When you first came aboard the project, or when you first read the script, what were your initial thoughts for it musically?
Well, it's interesting you ask. That's kind of the way that I ended up getting the job to work on the show. Was Dan Fogelman sent me a script, and he said, "Hey, just read the script and see what it inspires, and let me know. Let me know if something comes to you." And I remember reading the script, and as we all know, what happens at the end of that pilot episode. I remember just feeling like my whole world turned upside down, and the show and the script was just so thoughtful and beautiful and honest, and the emotion was just it was so palpable in the script. I immediately heard music. It's kind of just how I operate generally. I'll read a script, or I'll just see a visual of something, and I can. And I imagine what music around that would look like or sound like. And so for that particular, when I read that script, I heard music, and what I heard was something organic, something simple but complex. Just like the script, the script didn't have, the show is not, it doesn't have the bells and whistles of like some artificial intelligence drama, or it doesn't have these huge explosions. It's it's a very simple show in its core, and I think that's the beauty of it. And I think that's the same approach that I took to the score and the music. And so when I read the script, I heard acoustic guitars, and I heard cellos, and I heard vocals. I heard kind of really homegrown sounds that I could just make on my own in my studio.
One of the great qualities of the show is how emotional it is. It's the kind of emotion that could come across. Thank you. It's the kind of emotion that could come across as melodramatic, especially with the wrong kind of music. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges of conveying and underscoring the emotion of a show like this without going over the top?
It's a great question, and I think that the key is to see the show without the music first. So when I'm working on the show, I like to get episodes. I like to get early cuts of the show with nothing on it, just completely dry, as we call it. So no music to score any scenes, so I can just actually see the performances and work off of the emotion that's already there. And what I found in that process, because oftentimes in other projects, you kind of get an episode that's filled with all this music already. Either it's your own music, or there's temporary music that's placeholder for you to replace as a composer. But in this show, I just wanted to see the show without any music. And the thing is, it works without music too. And that was very telling to me, because the performances and the writing and the directing and the editing are so strong on the show that you don't need to do much more. And if you overdo it with the music and you have these big sweeping strings, it could become schmaltzy. And and that was always, you know, I think when the actual performance is there and when the work is really, really good and you're working to something as strong as the work is in this show, it gives you as the composer liberty to kind of step outside the normal kind of typical rom-com, you know, cheesy score. You know, it allows you to step outside, and Dan Fogelman has created something so beautiful. And he asks all of us who work on the show to kind of bring what we do as artists to the show. And I think that's why it succeeds and never crosses the line of being melodramatic. And so for me, I kind of, you know, my score is there. And sometimes it's bigger than other places, but it's really there to just help open up the tear ducts just a little bit more, as opposed to, you know, opening up the floodgates.
Right. One of the other unique qualities about this show is that it jumps back and forth in time. You know, obviously there's parallel storylines in each episode, but distinctly there's you know, young triplets and then older triplets and kind of their parallel tracks. Does that affect your work at all? Not necessarily conveying the period, but I guess distinguishing between the multiple storylines?
You know, early on, you know, the initial challenge on the show was, how do we sell these shifts in time? You know, is the audience going to know? Like, you know, how are they going to know? And I think that discussion was really important, because what I learned from that early on was, if the character, if the development of the story and the character development was told in the right way, and the performances were strong enough and the cinematography was right to sell kind of the differences between the time periods, then hopefully the audience would get it, and you wouldn't need to do too much. And so I think the beauty of this show, and that's a perfect example of why I love the show so much, is that we respect the audience a lot in this show. You know, there's a little, the audience has to work a little bit on the show. And by that, I mean, initially to kind of understand that there were these different time periods happening. You know, I could have easily done these kind of like big, sweeping little like pieces that would to say, hey, we're going back in time, or we're going forward in time. But I didn't. And I did something that was a little more ethereal and atmospheric, and something that was rooted in kind of like the sound of the show. It's like these cellos I'm using, and these cellos and some atmospheric pads that kind of help sell that. But it's so subtle. And I think what you realize, I think by the third or fourth episode, I almost abandoned doing anything during those transitions, because it was clear. The characters were developed. We knew who they were. They were strong characters that we already knew when we saw Jack, that, you know, he was in the past. You know, at some point you knew that. So so I think it was a really great exercise, and also it kind of dictated how I approach music on the show. I don't want to force feed emotion ever, you know. And I think the beauty of the show is the writing, performances, directing are strong, and I want the emotion that comes from the music to be honest and real and raw, just like the show. So, you know, there's a lot of respect for the audience too. You know, there's we want, you know, there's an intelligent audience that watches this show as well, and we don't need to tell everyone how to feel every 2 minutes.
Right. When you mentioned doing musical transitions between like flashbacks, I just had the most cheesy image in my mind of the like, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's like my biggest nightmare as a composer, having to do that. So it's like,
right.
we're traveling, everybody. We're traveling in time, but no, we don't have to do that on this show.
I wanted to talk to you about you wrote a song for the show as well, for the Memphis episode.
Yeah.
One of the most acclaimed episodes of the season. The song was called "We Can Always Come Back to This." Talk a little bit about, first of all, that episode, and about your original song for it, where the ideas for it came from.
Well, yeah, there was an episode, it was episode 16 called Memphis, and it's the story of in that episode, William and Randall go on a road trip to Memphis, and William, takes Randall on this journey, and in that process, you find out a lot about William's backstory. I mean, you even see William as a baby. I mean, and you see the relationship that he had with his mom. You find out in the course of the episode that his mother dies, and there's a big part of the episode is also about William's younger years as a musician, and he's in a blues band, blues cover band with his cousin Ricky, who's played by Brian Tyree Henry from that show Atlanta, and the entire episode is about William's backstory now. And the beauty of this episode was that it was a standalone episode between William and Randall, just the two of them, and it was this incredibly beautiful, heartfelt episode directed by John Recqua and Glenn Ficarra, and Dan Fogelman wrote the script. And when I saw the script, there was a scene where there's a flashback to William and his cousin Ricky in early 1970, and young William gives Ricky a piece of paper in the script, and he says, "Here, what do you think? Basically, I'm writing this." And in the script, Ricky is moved by this, and he assembles the whole band together and says, "Let's go, and let's just jam it out. Let's see where this goes." And so the song begins with the band intimately on this small stage in this nightclub, just like late hours after like everyone's left the bar. They're just sitting there and jamming it out, and you slowly see that this song is kind of the hit song for this band, and you see their audience grow in this kind of 4-minute montage, and they're playing to bigger and bigger clubs and venues, and you see people in the audience genuinely moved by it. That was kind of the direction of the script. And and after speaking to Glenn and John and Dan about what we wanted to achieve there, Glenn and John were very specific, and they said, look, we want it to feel like it's a Stax Recordings era, something from the Stax catalog. And if you're familiar with Stax, you know that Stax Records is one of the most influential Motown labels of all time. I mean, so artists like I don't know if Otis Redding was technically ever on Stax, but he was in some incarnation of Stax Records at some point. But that was the vibe. It was like we needed to create a song that was something that, like, it could have been an Otis Redding B-side, or something at that level. And I remember sweating bullets for like the first week, after seeing the script. I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? But I'm a singer-songwriter, and that's kind of my background. And so I came up with this idea, and the song was called "We Can Always Come Back to This." And it was just this idea that spoke to the idea of the show on the larger level of the show, and this idea that even if I die tomorrow or you die tomorrow, you're not here, our lives can still be connected in ways that we don't know. And this idea that we can always come back to this. And this lyric kept on repeating over and over in my head. And it reminded me that Motown songs are very conversational in their lyrics. They would have a lyric like that, like we can always come back to this. And I was like, oh, that's the song. So I wrote this melody and this song, and it was something I was really, really proud of. And I called a friend of mine who's a great Motown singer to help me finish it. And the producers loved it, and Glenn and John, were really excited about it. And then I had to write the song before and record it before the episode was shot. So that was a challenge in of itself that we pulled off. And the idea was to make sure that it felt incredibly authentic. That was it had to, and I think the people, from the studio to Glenn and John to Dan, all wanted it to be authentic. Like it was really coming from that era. And the way that I achieved that in the studio was the band that we assembled was this incredible band that has played on so many different Motown tracks and records. And we recorded live in the studio one day, and kind of I had the dream recording situation to make sure it felt authentic and real. And Brian, the actor, sang that lead vocal and absolutely just crushed it. He was beautiful. His emotion was raw. And we just had a wonderful run with the song afterwards. I could never have asked for the kind of, like, we were hitting like pop charts and stuff. Yeah. So it was really exciting. But it was like one of my career highlights for sure.
Yeah, and certainly no easy task. I mean, they said you go write a hit song, and
yeah, right. I think when you have a show that, when the art is that good to begin with, it just inspires you to kind of like do your best work you can possibly do. I mean, I'm doing things on this show I never imagined that. I never thought that like an Indian boy from New Jersey would be writing a Motown song for a TV show, and that song would end up in the charts. It's just like, it's very strange to me.
Right. And as you were explaining it, where the idea for the song came from, it seems so obvious now. I mean, like, oh, of course, yeah, it's basically what the show is about, how we're all connected, no matter what our gender, race, background. I mean, it's like that scene, I forget what episode it was, but Kevin's explaining his painting.
Episode 5, yes, Kevin painting, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's also, you're right. And that's funny you said that. That's a great point, because that is kind of what that was part of my inspiration too, was drawing from that particular scene. Where Kevin talks about, even though we may not be here, we're still part of this, like this fabric or this painting, and we will forever be in it. And the idea that life never really ends. It continues in its own way. And that was the inspiration too for the song. So thank you for bringing that up.
Of course, you're welcome. Now, of course, everyone's anticipating season 2. I don't want spoilers, but have you gotten any kind of indication yet of where it's going, or have you begun work at all?
No, I'm going to begin work this summer at some point. But I like to not know anything. I have like earmuffs on at all times. Anytime there's any discussion about Jack. So. I like to not know, because I don't want it to ever impact the way that I score a scene. I almost want to I want to score music for the show. I want to write the music for the show as if I'm an audience member writing music for the show. And so I'm experiencing it as they are. I don't want to hint at anything. So I consciously try to this is like a ignorance is bliss type of situation. That in one of the few cases where I really do believe that.
Well, it's a great show, and Siddharta, congratulations on your work, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thank you so much. An honor to be talking to you. So thanks.
You're welcome. Have a good day.